international trade priorities and concerns for 2021. My guest is Clifford Sosnow. He co-chairs the Trade and Investment Group at the Fasken law firm. Clifford, welcome.
Hi.
So tell me, what do you think will be, and for that matter, what should be the priorities for international trade policy in 2021?
Coming out of the Biden administration,
Correct.
the big issues obviously are China. That hasn't gone away. Biden's left with a whole suite of executive orders from the president on limitations on doing business with an ever-expanding list of Chinese companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that just that's lacking clarity. That's very ambiguous in many respects, but it's on the president's plate. He's got to figure out what his China strategy is. Now, he has said that he wants to work with the allies on that, but it's really not clear what that means. And so a more developed strategy in terms of perhaps anti-dumping as it deals with steel, intellectual property theft, any number of issues dealing with cybersecurity still are on his plate. They're very, very serious issues, and they haven't gone away. The tone will change. You're still going to have bipartisan consensus in Congress on those issues. On the details are going to be problematic, but that's going to be, it strikes me, a number one issue for the president. Obviously, in the North American space, the tone up till now has been an American first strategy. The president-elect has said that he very much believes in a Buy America peace. Frankly, that's not an unconventional position. It's a position that goes back to before President Obama. But again, that's going to create certain strains within the North American economy. And he's got to figure out how he wants to manage that. The tone will be different. The issues of how to manage the new USMCA that's again been put on his plate will have to be managed. And some of those issues of tensions on Buy America and with Mexico on labor still are on his plate, still that he's going to have to do with. And then finally, Iran becomes a very serious issue in the sanctions piece associated with that. And you've got the president-elect striking a different tone today as it applies to Iran, wanting to re-engage in certain ways. But what does that mean, again, in terms of sanctions? What does that mean in terms of doing business with Iran? How is that going to be playing out for banks who are going to be paying a lot of attention to that? Those are very, very critical trade issues that are on the president-elect's plate. And then finally, I will say that the UK piece hasn't gone away. As you know, the UK is no longer part of the European Union. It's a large economy, and the president has to get his head around, president-elect rather, has to get his head around how he wants to deal with the UK piece. Does he want to have a new trade agreement? What kind of a trade agreement? Does he want to have something with Europe? As you know, that's been the Holy Grail kind of relationship with Europe. Does that diminish now as a consequence of the UK leaving? So those are things that any president that's got a forward-looking perspective is going to want to have to tackle over the coming months and years.
Let me cycle back to North America for a moment and specifically ask you about Canada. What is the state of, how would you characterize the state of U.S.-Canada trade relations right now?
I would use the word bruised. If for no other reason than tone has been harsh until now. And this is, I'm not trying to choose a particular political persuasion one way or the other. The government in Canada and Canadian business have viewed the tone as harsh. Whether in fact that tone is harsh is another story. and they view the relationship as having been turbulent with safeguards, most recently as it applied to aluminum that was threatened and then removed with respect to a variety of usage of national security. All of those things have created a turbulence in the relationship as opposed to greater steps towards integration that at this stage of the game, I would say, raise questions and raise a certain degree of wariness by the business community. I will say that the business community is hopeful that the tone will change. But again, the business community is very wary of things like the Buy America provisions, how those play out, whether there'll be Canadian exemptions. Will the auto industry continue its integration with the new USMCA? How will that play out in terms of third-party suppliers? All of those things are still question marks on the Canadian business landscape. And then finally, Canadian business typically does play in the WTO, Robert, and the question is, will Biden, President-elect Biden, re-engage on that? And if he does, what does that mean for the Canadian government? Some big issues are e-commerce, increasing trade facilitation, and those things haven't gone away. The Court of Appeal at the WTO is a big issue as well. So all those things are important to the Canadian government. All of those things are important to Canadian business. And there's a hopefulness that the president-elect will re-engage at that level, but it's not clear yet at this stage what that is. So I would say cautious optimism, but a wariness.
You cited the WTO. I wonder if you feel that WTO is still relevant or still has enough teeth in that particular institution in order to uphold settlements between trading partners who bring their disputes to before that particular body.
In its current manifestation, in its current position right now, for those who don't know, there is an appeal mechanism. There's a panel and there's an appeal mechanism. Well, right now the appeal mechanism has been shut out, and so any panel decisions really not appeal. The way the WTO works is, if a party doesn't like those panel decisions, it just shuts it down. And so as long as there's no appeal body at the WTO, and it is a controversial body, some view it as a trenching on U.S. sovereignty, but as long as it's not there, then that seriously impairs the functioning of the WTO. The WTO is valuable because it does engage almost every country in the world, and as slow-moving a beast as it is a slow-moving beast, it's okay to produce very important agreements, like the most recent being the Trade Facilitation Agreement, that for countries like Canada, for the United States, for Europe, really is not that much a deal, but for countries like China, for Indonesia, for Malaysia, for Vietnam, it really raises the bar in terms of reducing the red tape and the regulation to do business in those countries, without which where there's no free trade agreements with them. And the WTO does that, and really there's no other body like the WTO to do. So as lumpy as the WTO is, as ungainly a beast as it is, and as problematic as it is in certain respects, it deals with the global trading situation in a way that no other trade instrument or agreement does. And so it does have that level of importance.
Speaking of China, what do you think that North America should be at all concerned about RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership between China and Asia-Pacific nations? Does that give China more influence in the area? And given the fact that we are not a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, should we be concerned that China is asserting a level of influence over East Asia that at the expense of the United States?
Well, they're signaling that they are a mature enough economy and sophisticated enough economy with sophisticated diplomats that they can negotiate complicated agreements. And it's not clear to me that the level of commitments that are contained in those agreements are that deep, but it's a signaling that China has influence influence as a significant economy in Asia and Southeast Asia, where frankly the U.S. has been absent. And yes, Japan is an important piece to the U.S. economy, but the U.S. has walked away from the TPP, and China is filling the void. And in many ways, that's a worrisome development because those economies will do business with China. And so just as the U.S. looked at the TPP in an earlier time and in gathering as a kind of a cementing of geopolitical relationships with countries against a strategic rival, China's doing the exact same thing, but compared to the U.S., they're very much playing in their own backyard. And the U.S., by walking away from the TPP, has in many ways signaled that although they're not vacating the area, clearly they're not militarily, at an economic level, they're missing out on some very, very significant opportunities. And in my view, that is an issue of focus that the president-elect should be thinking about.
Indeed, an awful lot of concerns that President Biden is going to have on his plate with regard to international trade. But Clifford Sosnow of Fasken, thank you so much for helping us to kind of outline some of these big concerns and kind of get a sense of what's coming in 2021 in that area. Thanks very much for being with me today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.